Sometimes the person who looks the least likely to survive is the one who ends up saving everyone else. Sometimes the one they laugh at on day one is the same one they salute on the last day. And sometimes in the cruelest, coldest, most unforgiving waters on earth, a quiet woman with nothing to prove and everything to lose becomes the warrior nobody saw coming. This is not a story about luck. This is not a story about someone who had it easy. This is the story of a woman who was told 1,000 times she did not belong, and every single time she answered with silence, with grit, and with something so deep inside her chest that even the toughest men in the room could not explain it. They called her the Rookie. They said she would not last a week. But when the water hit her face and every other body around her started to break, she was the one still standing. And that was the moment they realized they were looking at the next leader of the unit. Her name was Jordan Elise Carter. She grew up in a small house on the edge of a dying town in rural Oklahoma. The kind of town where the gas station was the only place open past 8 at night, and where most kids either left for the city or stayed and worked the land until their backs gave out. Jordan was the middle child of 5. Her father, Thomas Carter, was a retired Army staff sergeant who had done 2 tours in Iraq and come home with a limp in his left leg and a silence in his chest that never really went away. Her mother, Diane, worked double shifts at the county hospital as a nurse and still found a way to cook dinner every night, even when her hands were shaking from exhaustion. There was no extra money. There was no luxury. There were no vacations or birthday parties with balloons and clowns. What there was, though, was discipline. And there was toughness. Thomas Carter did not believe in raising soft children. He believed in raising survivors. Every morning before school, Jordan and her siblings would line up in the backyard. Thomas would make them do push-ups, sit-ups, and a 1-mile run around the property. If someone cried, they started over. If someone quit, they started over. If someone complained, they did double. Jordan never complained. Even at 7 years old, she would bite down on her lip until it bled and finish every rep. Her older brothers would sometimes look at her with something between confusion and respect. She was smaller than all of them. She was quieter than all of them, but she never once stopped before they did. Thomas noticed this. He never said anything about it out loud, but Diane once told Jordan years later that her father used to sit on the porch after those morning sessions and say to himself, "That girl is different. That girl has something none of the others have." School was not kind to Jordan. She was not popular. She did not wear the right clothes. She did not talk about the right things. She sat in the back of every classroom and kept to herself. Other girls made fun of her calloused hands and her short hair and the bruises on her knees from training. Boys did not pay attention to her unless it was to mock her for being too quiet or too serious. She had no real friends until 8th grade, when a boy named Marcus Delgado moved to town from Texas and sat next to her at lunch because every other seat was taken. Marcus was the son of a Marine, and he understood the world Jordan came from. They became close quickly. He was the only person she ever told about her dream. She wanted to become a Navy SEAL, not just serve in the military, not just join the Navy. She wanted to become one of the most elite warriors on the planet. When she told Marcus, he did not laugh. He looked at her for a long time, and then he said, "You are crazy. But if anyone can do it, it is probably you." That was enough for Jordan. She did not need the whole world to believe in her. She just needed one person. And Marcus was that person. High school passed in a blur of early mornings and late nights. Jordan joined the track team and the swim team. She was not the fastest on the track, but she had the most endurance. She could run longer and harder than anyone else on the team. In the pool, she was a different animal entirely. She moved through water like she had been born in it. Her swim coach, a retired Navy man named Coach Rains, saw something in her immediately. He started training her separately, pushing her harder, making her swim laps until her arms felt like they were going to fall off. One evening after practice, he pulled her aside and said, "Jordan, I've coached hundreds of swimmers. You are not the most talented I've ever seen, but you are the most relentless. And in the water, relentless beats talented every single time." Those words buried themselves deep inside her. She carried them with her every day after that. When Jordan turned 18, she enlisted in the United States Navy. Her father drove her to the recruiting office in his old truck. He did not say much on the ride. When they arrived, he turned off the engine and sat there for a moment. Then he looked at her and said, Do not quit, no matter what they do to you. No matter what they say to you. Do not quit. Jordan nodded. She got out of the truck and walked inside. She did not look back. She could not afford to. Looking back meant doubt, and doubt was a luxury she could not carry. Boot camp was hard, but Jordan had been training for it her entire life. She finished near the top of her class. She kept her head down, followed orders, and outworked everyone around her. Her drill instructors noticed her early, not because she was loud or flashy, but because she was consistent. Every single day, she showed up and gave everything she had. There was no drama with Jordan. There were no excuses. There was just work. Quiet, relentless, grinding work. After boot camp, she was assigned to a support unit, but she immediately began the process of applying for SEAL training. The paperwork alone was a battle. She had to pass a series of physical screening tests that were designed to weed out all but the most physically gifted candidates. She passed every one of them on her first attempt. The day she received her orders to report to basic underwater demolition SEAL training, known as BUD/S, she sat alone in her bunk and stared at the paper for 20 minutes. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from the sheer weight of what was about to happen. She knew the statistics. She knew that roughly 75% of candidates who started BUD/S would not finish. She knew that the training was designed to break people, physically and mentally, until only the hardest and most determined were left. She also knew that very few women had ever attempted it, and even fewer had completed it. The odds were stacked against her in ways that most people could not even imagine. But Jordan had never been interested in odds. She was interested in effort, and effort was the one thing she could control. She arrived at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California, on a Tuesday morning in early March. The air was cold and smelled like salt. The Pacific Ocean stretched out in front of her, gray and endless and indifferent. She stood with a group of over 200 other candidates, all of them young, all of them strong, all of them convinced they were going to make it. The instructors walked up and down the line, looking at each candidate like they were studying livestock at an auction. When one of them stopped in front of Jordan, he paused. He looked her up and down. Then he leaned in close and said, "You know where you are, right?" Jordan said, "Yes, instructor." He stared at her for another moment and then moved on. She could feel the eyes of every other candidate on her. She could feel their doubt, their amusement, their disbelief. She let it all wash over her like water and kept her eyes straight ahead. The first few weeks of BUD/S were a slow and methodical destruction of everything a person thought they knew about their own limits. The days started before the sun came up and did not end until long after it had gone down. The candidates ran in the sand until their legs felt like concrete. They did push-ups in the surf until their arms gave out. They carried logs over their heads as a team until their shoulders screamed and their spines felt like they were going to snap. They were cold, wet, exhausted, and hungry at all times. The instructors did not yell because they were angry. They yelled because they were testing. Every shout, every insult, every impossible demand was a question with only one answer. Are you going to quit, or are you going to keep going? Jordan kept going. Day after day, she kept going. When other candidates dropped out, ringing the bell that signaled their voluntary withdrawal from the program, Jordan would watch them walk away and feel a pain in her chest that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. She understood their decision. She respected it, but she could not make it herself. Quitting was not something her body knew how to do. It was like asking her to stop breathing. Her father's words echoed in her skull every single hour of every single day. Do not quit. Do not quit. Do not quit. The other candidates did not know what to make of her. Some of them respected her from the start. Others resented her presence. A few of them openly questioned whether she belonged there. One candidate, a large man from Georgia named Travis Henley, made it his personal mission to let Jordan know she was not welcome. He never said anything directly to her face in front of the instructors, but in the moments between evolutions, when the candidates were alone, he would make comments. He would say things like, "This is not a place for you," or "You are going to get someone killed." Jordan never responded to him. She never even looked at him when he spoke. She just kept moving forward, one step at a time, one rep at a time, one breath at a time. What nobody knew, not even the instructors, was that Jordan was carrying something heavier than any log or any pack. 3 weeks before she arrived at BUD/S, she had received a phone call from her mother. Thomas Carter, her father, had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors said he had less than a year. Jordan wanted to go home. Every cell in her body wanted to get on a plane and fly back to Oklahoma and sit beside her father and hold his hand. But when she called him to tell him she was thinking about deferring her training, Thomas Carter did not hesitate. He said, "You go, you finish. That is how you honor me. Not by sitting in a hospital room watching me die, by becoming what I always knew you could be." Jordan cried that night. She cried harder than she had ever cried in her life. And then she wiped her face, packed her bag, and got on the bus to Coronado. She carried that weight silently through every evolution. She carried it through the runs and the swims and the log PT and the endless hours of being cold and miserable. Nobody saw it. Nobody knew. But it was there, pressing down on her shoulders like an invisible anchor, making everything harder and somehow, impossibly, making her stronger. Because every time she wanted to stop, every time her body begged her to give up, she would think of her father lying in that hospital bed, and she would keep going. She was not just training for herself anymore. She was training for him. She was carrying his name and his legacy and his belief in her through every single moment of that brutal, beautiful, unforgiving program. By the end of the first phase of Bud/S, the class of over 200 had been cut to less than 90. Jordan was still there. She had not missed a single evolution. She had not been rolled back for injury or performance. She was still standing, still quiet, still relentless, and the instructors were starting to pay attention. Not because she was the strongest or the fastest, but because she was the one who never wavered. In a program designed to make people doubt themselves, Jordan Carter had not blinked once. And that kind of steadiness, that kind of unshakable calm in the middle of chaos, was exactly what they were looking for. They just did not know yet how far that quality would carry her. They were about to find out, because Hell Week was coming, and Hell Week would change everything. Hell Week began on a Sunday night. The candidates had been told it was coming. They had been warned. They had heard the stories from those who came before them, the ones who survived it and the ones who did not. But no amount of warning could prepare a human being for what Hell Week actually felt like. It was 5.5 days of continuous training with a total of roughly 4 hours of sleep spread across the entire period. It was the single most physically and psychologically punishing experience that the United States military had ever designed, and it existed for one purpose only: to find out who would break and who would not. The instructors woke the candidates with explosions, smoke grenades, flashbangs, and fire hoses filled the barracks with chaos. The sound was deafening. The confusion was total. Candidates scrambled out of their racks, tripping over each other, eyes burning from the smoke, skin already soaked from the high-pressure water. The instructors were screaming orders that contradicted each other. Get outside. Get on the ground. Get in the surf. Get back inside. The point was not to follow the orders. The point was to see who could function under extreme stress, who could think clearly when everything around them was falling apart, and who would simply shut down. Jordan hit the ground running, literally. When the chaos erupted, she was on her feet in seconds. Her body moved before her mind had time to catch up. She grabbed her boots, laced them tight, and was one of the first candidates out the door. The cold night air hit her like a wall. The beach was dark. The ocean was roaring. The instructors were shadows moving through the haze of smoke and artificial light. She could hear candidates already yelling, already panicking, already questioning whether they could endure what was coming. Jordan did not yell. She did not panic. She fell in line and waited for the next order. The first evolution of Hell Week was a 4-mile timed run on the beach in soft sand. The candidates' boots sank into the ground with every step, making each stride feel twice as hard as it should have been. Jordan settled into a rhythm. She had learned long ago that the secret to endurance was not speed, it was consistency. She kept her breathing steady. She kept her stride even. She let faster candidates pass her in the early miles, and watched as many of them burned out and fell behind by the 3rd mile. She finished the run in the middle of the pack, which was exactly where she wanted to be. Not drawing attention, not falling behind, just surviving. After the run came the surf torture. The candidates were ordered to link arms and walk into the Pacific Ocean until the water reached their chests. Then they were told to sit down. The water was cold enough to steal the breath from a person's lungs. Jordan felt it hit her body like 1,000 tiny knives. Every muscle in her body contracted. Her teeth began to chatter so violently she thought they might crack. The instructors stood on the beach, dry and warm, watching. They waited. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 15. Candidates started to shiver uncontrollably. Some started to cry. Others stared straight ahead with empty eyes, their minds already somewhere else, already calculating how many more hours of this they could endure. Jordan focused on one thing, her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and steady. She repeated a single phrase in her head over and over. I am still here. I am still here. I am still here. They were pulled out of the water just long enough to do another set of exercises on the beach and then sent back in. This cycle repeated for hours. Cold water. Exercise. Cold water. Exercise. The human body is not designed to function in those conditions for that long. Core temperatures drop. Motor function deteriorates. Decision-making becomes impaired. The instructors knew all of this. They watched for the signs. They watched for the candidates whose eyes went blank, whose movements became sluggish, whose spirits were visibly cracking under the relentless pressure. By the second day of Hell Week, the class had already lost more than 20 candidates. The bell that sat in the center of the compound rang again and again as men walked up to it, grabbed the rope, and pulled. 3 rings meant you were done. 3 rings meant you were choosing warmth and food and sleep over suffering and cold and exhaustion. There was no shame in ringing that bell. The instructors made that clear. But Jordan could not hear that bell without feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean. Every ring was a reminder of how close every single one of them was to breaking. On the second night, the boat crews were sent out for a paddling evolution. Each crew of 7 candidates had to carry their inflatable boat on their heads to the water, paddle out through the surf zone, navigate to a series of checkpoints, and paddle back. The surf was heavy that night. Waves crashed over the boats and sent candidates tumbling into the black water. Jordan's boat crew was struggling. Their boat leader, a candidate named Ramirez, was strong but was having trouble keeping the crew coordinated in the dark. The waves kept hitting them from different angles, and every time they thought they had made it past the break, another wall of white water would slam into them and push them back toward the shore. Jordan was sitting in the rear of the boat, paddling hard, when a massive wave caught them from the side. The boat flipped. All 7 crew members were thrown into the churning water. Jordan went under. The cold hit her face and filled her sinuses. She could not see. She could not hear. She could not tell which way was up. For 3 seconds, maybe. 4, she was completely disoriented. Then her training kicked in. She relaxed her body, felt the pull of the current, and let it guide her to the surface. She broke through the water gasping and immediately started looking for her crew. 2 of them were clinging to the overturned boat. 3 more were swimming toward it. 1 was missing. Jordan did not hesitate. She turned her head, scanning the dark water, and spotted a body floating face down about 20 meters away. It was a candidate named Peters, a quiet kid from Minnesota who had barely made it through the first phase. Jordan swam to him harder and faster than she had ever swum in her life. When she reached him, she grabbed the collar of his life vest and flipped him over. He was conscious, but barely. He had swallowed water and was choking. She held his head above the surface with one arm and kicked toward the boat with everything she had in her legs. The waves fought her every inch of the way. Her arms burned. Her lungs screamed. But she did not let go of Peters. She did not let the ocean take him. When she got him back to the boat, Ramirez and the others pulled him up. Peters coughed out water for 2 minutes straight and then looked at Jordan with eyes that said something words could not capture. The instructors had seen the whole thing from the safety boat nearby. They said nothing at the time. But Jordan would later learn that one of them had written in his evaluation notes that night a single sentence. Carter is a natural leader under pressure. The days blurred together after that. Jordan stopped counting hours. She stopped thinking about what day it was, or how much time was left. She existed entirely in the present moment. The next step, the next breath, the next order. She ate when they let her eat, which was not often. She rested when they let her rest, which was almost never. She moved through the evolutions like a machine, but not a cold one, a warm one. A machine powered by something the instructors rarely saw, a combination of physical toughness and emotional depth that made her both hard and human at the same time. On the third day, the candidates were put through a series of log PT exercises that lasted for 6 hours straight. 7 candidates per log, each log weighing several hundred pounds, held above their heads while the instructors counted out rep after rep after rep. Jordan's crew was faltering. 2 of the men on her log were on the verge of collapse. Their arms were shaking so badly that the log was wobbling dangerously. One slip and someone could be seriously injured. Jordan, who was standing at the center of the log, began talking to her crew, not shouting, not demanding, talking. She said things like, "We have got this. One more rep. Stay with me. I am right here. We are doing this together." Her voice was calm and steady, and it cut through the noise and the pain like a blade. The 2 struggling candidates lifted their arms and pushed through the next set, then the next, then the next. The crew finished the evolution without a single member dropping out. That night, something shifted in the way the other candidates looked at Jordan. It was subtle, but it was real. The resentment that some of them had carried toward her began to dissolve. Travis Henley, the man from Georgia who had spent weeks making comments about her not belonging, was on a different log crew, and his crew had lost 2 members during the same evolution. He watched Jordan's crew finish together and said nothing, but the expression on his face had changed. The mockery was gone. Something else had taken its place. Something that looked a lot like respect. On the 4th day of Hell Week, the candidates were brought to the combat training pool for a water confidence evolution. This was different from the surf torture or the boat paddling. This was designed to test a candidate's ability to remain calm while being physically overwhelmed in the water. The instructors would approach each candidate in the pool and attempt to simulate a drowning scenario. They would push the candidate's head underwater, tangle their equipment, restrict their movements, and create a situation of maximum panic with minimum options. The only way to pass was to stay calm. Fighting the instructor was an automatic failure. Panicking was an automatic failure. The only acceptable response was controlled breathing, systematic problem solving, and absolute composure. Jordan entered the pool knowing that this evolution was where many candidates met their end, not because they were weak, but because the human brain is hardwired to panic when it cannot breathe. Overriding that instinct required a level of mental control that most people simply did not possess. She had trained for this. She had spent hours in the pool back in Oklahoma with Coach Rains, practicing breath holds and underwater problem solving. But training and reality are not the same thing. Training is controlled, reality is not. The instructor who approached her in the pool was a senior chief named Braddock. He was built like a refrigerator and had a reputation for being one of the most intense water confidence evaluators on the staff. He looked at Jordan with flat eyes and said, "Ready?" She nodded. He pushed her under. The water closed over her head, and the world went silent. She felt Braddock's hands on her shoulders, pushing her deeper. She felt the weight of her gear pulling her down. She felt her lungs begin to tighten as the air inside them started to thin. Then she felt him grab the straps of her equipment and twist them, tangling them around her arms, restricting her ability to surface. This was the test. This was the moment where the body screamed and the mind had to answer. Jordan did not fight. She did not thrash. She did not claw at the water or at Braddock's hands. She went still, completely still. She opened her eyes underwater and assessed the situation. She identified the tangle in her straps. She began to work through it methodically, one loop at a time, using her fingers to trace the path of the webbing and undo the knots. Her lungs were burning. Her vision was starting to narrow. She could feel her heartbeat in her temples, loud and fast, but her hands were steady. Her movements were precise. She freed herself from the tangle, pushed off the bottom of the pool, and broke the surface with a single controlled exhale. Braddock looked at her. He did not smile. He did not congratulate her. But he gave her a nod so slight that anyone watching from a distance would have missed it entirely. That nod meant more to Jordan than any medal or award she would ever receive. It meant she had earned the respect of a man who did not give it easily. It meant she had proven, in the most primal and elemental way possible, that she could be trusted when things went wrong. Hell Week ended on a Friday morning. The candidates who survived were gathered on the beach as the sun came up. Out of the original class that had started the week, less than 30 were still standing. Jordan was among them. She stood with her shoulders back and her chin up, her body battered and broken and barely functional, and she felt something rise in her chest that she had no name for. It was not pride exactly. It was not relief. It was something deeper and quieter than both of those things. It was the feeling of having walked through fire and come out the other side still standing. It was the feeling of having proven, once and for all, that she belonged. The instructors stood in front of the surviving candidates and spoke briefly. They said the usual things about honor and sacrifice and the long road ahead. But one instructor, a lieutenant named Calloway, added something at the end that stuck with Jordan forever. He said, "Some of you will go on to lead teams. Some of you will go on to lead platoons. And some of you, the rarest of you, will go on to lead in ways that change the course of missions and the lives of the people around you. That kind of leadership does not come from rank. It comes from character. And character is not built in classrooms. It is built in moments like the ones you just survived." He paused and looked across the group. His eyes lingered on Jordan for half a second longer than anyone else. She noticed. She filed it away and said nothing. In the days that followed Hell Week, the surviving candidates entered the second phase of Bud/S, which focused heavily on combat diving. This was Jordan's element. She had always been stronger in the water than on land, and the diving evolutions showcased her abilities in ways that the running and the log PT had not. She was precise with her equipment. She was calm under depth. She was an exceptional navigator, able to maintain course and bearing in conditions of zero visibility with a reliability that impressed even the most seasoned diving instructors. But the second phase also brought new challenges. The academic demands increased significantly. Candidates were required to learn complex dive physics, underwater demolition techniques, and extensive mission planning protocols. Jordan studied harder than she had ever studied in her life. She formed a small study group with 3 other candidates: Ramirez, a woman named Singh who had also survived Hell Week, and a quiet engineer named Tanaka, who had a gift for breaking down complex problems into simple steps. They met every evening in the common area and quizzed each other until they could recite the material in their sleep. During this time, Jordan received a letter from her mother. Thomas Carter's condition had worsened. The cancer had spread to his liver. The doctors had adjusted their timeline. He might have 6 months. He might have less. Jordan read the letter alone in her bunk, folded it carefully, and placed it inside her pillowcase. She did not cry. She had made a promise to her father, and crying would not help her keep it. The only thing that would help was finishing what she had started. So she woke up the next morning, laced her boots, and went back to training. The pool competency test at the end of the second phase was one of the most feared evolutions in all of Bud/S. Candidates were required to perform a series of underwater tasks while instructors actively harassed them, pulling their masks, shutting off their air supply, tying their hoses and knots, and doing everything possible to simulate the chaos and terror of an equipment failure during a real combat dive. Candidates who could not maintain their composure were removed from the program immediately. Jordan went into the test with a clarity that surprised even her. She had always been good in the water, but something about this test, something about the combination of pressure and purpose, unlocked a level of performance she had never reached before. When the instructors ripped her mask off, she calmly replaced it and cleared it. When they shut off her air supply, she switched to her backup without a single wasted movement. When they tied her hoses in knots, she untangled them with the same patient precision she had shown during the water confidence test in Hell Week. She moved through every challenge like she had been born for this exact moment, like every swim in Coach Rains's pool, every morning exercise in her father's backyard, every cold night in the Oklahoma wind had been leading her to this spot at the bottom of a training pool in Coronado, California. She passed the test with the highest marks in her class. When the scores were posted, the other candidates gathered around the board and stared. Ramirez looked at her and shook his head slowly. Tanaka whistled low under his breath. Singh put a hand on Jordan's shoulder and squeezed. Travis Henley stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, looking at the board. Then he turned and walked away without a word. But later that evening, he found Jordan in the chow hall. He sat down across from her, set his tray on the table and said, "I owe you an apology. I spent weeks telling you that you did not belong here. I was wrong. You belong here more than most of us." Jordan looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you." And that was it. No speech. No lecture. No victory lap. Just 2 words that carried the weight of everything she had endured to earn them. The third and final phase of Bud/S was land warfare. It was a 9-week block focused on weapons training, demolitions, small unit tactics, and field operations. Jordan threw herself into it with the same quiet intensity she had brought to every other phase. She learned to shoot with precision. She learned to move through terrain without making a sound. She learned to build and detonate explosive charges with surgical accuracy. She learned to plan and execute raids on enemy positions with a level of tactical thinking that earned praise from instructors who had been in actual combat. But the thing that set her apart most during the third phase was not her shooting or her tactics, it was her leadership. During field exercises, when the pressure was highest and the stakes felt most real, Jordan became the person that everyone turned to. Not because she demanded it, not because she shouted the loudest, but because she had earned it. She had earned it in the water and on the beach, and in every quiet moment where she chose to keep going instead of giving up. The other candidates trusted her because they had watched her prove herself 100 times over, and not once had she let them down. The final exercise of the third phase was a 48-hour simulated combat mission that tested everything the candidates had learned over the entire course of Bud/S. Jordan's squad was assigned a complex target in a simulated hostile environment. The mission required infiltration by water, a long-range patrol over land, a precision assault on a defended position, and a coordinated extraction under simulated enemy fire. The squad leader chosen for the mission was Ramirez, but 12 hours into the exercise, Ramirez took a simulated casualty, a role-played injury that removed him from command. The instructors watched to see what would happen next. Without a word, without a moment of hesitation, Jordan stepped forward and took command of the squad. She reorganized the element, adjusted the plan to account for the loss of their leader, and led the team through the remainder of the mission with a calm authority that left the instructors writing furiously in their evaluation notebooks. The mission was completed successfully. Every objective was met. Every team member was accounted for. And Jordan Carter, the quiet girl from Oklahoma who nobody expected to last a week, had just led a Bud/S squad through one of the most demanding exercises in the entire program. Graduation day at the Naval Special Warfare Center was nothing like what most people imagine when they think of a military ceremony. There were no fireworks. There were no massive crowds. There were no television cameras or celebrity speeches. It was a quiet, serious event held on the grinder, the concrete courtyard where so much suffering and transformation had taken place over the previous months. The candidates who had survived, the ones who had refused to ring the bell, who had endured Hell Week and pool competency and land warfare and everything in between, stood in formation wearing their dress uniforms with their faces clean and their posture rigid. The families who had come to watch sat in folding chairs under the California sun, some of them crying, some of them beaming, all of them understanding that the person standing in front of them was not the same person who had left home months ago. Jordan stood in that formation with her chin level and her eyes forward. She could feel the sun on her face and the fabric of her uniform against her skin, and the weight of everything she had accomplished pressing against her chest like a second heartbeat. She had made it, after everything. After every cold night in the surf, after every moment of doubt that she had swallowed down and converted into fuel, after every letter from her mother and every phone call where she could hear her father's voice getting weaker on the other end of the line, she had made it. She was going to be a Navy SEAL. Diane Carter had flown to California for the ceremony. She sat in the second row in a blue dress she had bought at a thrift store the week before. Her hands were clasped in her lap and her eyes were red from crying, but she was smiling. Thomas Carter was not there. He was in a hospital bed in Oklahoma, too sick to travel, too weak to stand, but he had insisted on being part of the day in his own way. Before Diane left for the airport, Thomas had given her a small envelope. He'd told her to give it to Jordan after the ceremony. He'd told her not to open it. He told her she would know when the time was right. The commanding officer of the Naval Special Warfare Center spoke briefly during the ceremony. He talked about the meaning of service and the responsibility that came with wearing the trident, the golden insignia that identified a Navy SEAL. He said that earning the trident was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of a life defined by sacrifice, by discipline, by the willingness to go to places that most people could not even imagine, and do things that most people could not even comprehend. He said that every person standing in that formation had proven that they had the raw material to carry that burden. But he also said that the true test of a SEAL was not what they did in training, it was what they did in the field, in the darkness, in the moments when no one was watching, and the only thing standing between success and failure was the character of the individual holding the weapon. When he finished speaking, The tridents were pinned. One by one, each candidate walked forward and had the insignia pressed into their chest by a senior operator. The tradition was for the pin to be pressed hard, driven into the flesh through the uniform, a final act of controlled pain that symbolized the suffering that had earned it. When Jordan stepped forward, the senior chief who pinned her trident was Braddock, the same man who had tested her in the pool during Hell Week, the same man who had pushed her underwater and watched her refuse to panic. He looked at her as he held the pin against her chest, and then, for the first time in all the months she had known him, he smiled. It was small and brief, and barely there, but it was real. He pressed the trident into her chest hard enough to draw blood, and Jordan did not flinch. She stood there with her eyes locked on his, and absorbed the pain the way she had absorbed every other challenge that had been thrown at her, with silence, with steadiness, with the quiet certainty of a person who knew exactly who she was. After the ceremony, Diane found Jordan on the grinder. They stood facing each other for a long moment, and then Diane pulled her daughter into a hug so tight that Jordan could feel her mother's heartbeat against her own. They stayed like that for a while, not speaking, not needing to. Then Diane pulled back, wiped her eyes, reached into her purse, and handed Jordan the envelope from Thomas. Jordan opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in her father's handwriting, which had become shaky and uneven from the illness. The letter was short. It said, "Jordan, I knew you would make it. I knew it when you were 7 years old and you finished every rep without complaining. I knew it when you told me you wanted to be a SEAL and I saw that look in your eyes that told me you were not dreaming. You were deciding, I am the proudest father who has ever lived. Not because of what you have accomplished, but because of who you are. The trident on your chest is just metal. The warrior wearing it is everything. I love you, Dad." Jordan read the letter 3 times. She folded it carefully and put it in her breast pocket, right next to the trident. Then she looked at her mother and said, "I need to call him." Diane nodded and handed her the phone. Thomas answered on the second ring. His voice was thin and tired, but when he heard Jordan's voice, something in it changed. Something lit up. They talked for 10 minutes. Jordan told him about the ceremony. She told him about the pin. She told him about the senior chief who had smiled at her. Thomas listened to every word, and when she was done, he said, "You carried me with you every step of the way. I felt it. Even from here, I felt it." Jordan closed her eyes and pressed the phone harder against her ear, as if she could pull him closer through the signal. She said, "I did, Dad, every step." Thomas Carter died 43 days after Jordan's graduation. He passed in his sleep on a Wednesday morning, with Diane holding his hand and the television playing a baseball game he could no longer see. Jordan was at her first duty station when she got the call. She sat on the edge of her bunk, held the phone against her chest and stared at the wall for a long time. Then she stood up, put on her uniform, and went to her commanding officer's office. She requested emergency leave to attend the funeral. It was granted immediately. She flew home to Oklahoma the next day. The funeral was small. A few dozen people from the town, some family, a handful of Thomas's old army buddies who had driven from different states to pay their respects. Jordan wore her dress uniform, with the trident visible on her chest. She stood beside the casket and did not speak during the service. She did not need to. Her presence there in that uniform with that pin said everything that needed to be said about the man who had raised her and the values he had given her. After the service, one of Thomas's old friends, a retired sergeant major named Bill Everett, approached Jordan. He shook her hand and said, "Your father talked about you every chance he got. He said you were the toughest person he had ever known." "And your father knew tough people." Jordan thanked him and watched him walk away. She stood at the grave long after everyone else had left, her hand resting on the cold stone, and whispered a single sentence, "I will make you proud every day for the rest of my life." She returned to duty the following week and threw herself into the next stage of her career with a focus and determination that bordered on obsessive. After earning the trident, new SEALs were assigned to operational platoons within SEAL teams, and Jordan was assigned to a team based on the West Coast. She was the only woman in her platoon. The dynamics were different from Bud/S. In training, the goal was survival. In the platoon, the goal was integration. She had to prove herself all over again, not as a candidate, but as an operator. She had to demonstrate that she could carry her weight on real missions, in real environments, against real threats. The men in her platoon were experienced and hardened. Some of them had multiple combat deployments under their belts. They respected the trident, but they did not give trust freely. Trust had to be earned in the field, under fire, in the moments when everything fell apart, and the only thing that mattered was whether the person next to you would hold the line. Jordan earned that trust slowly and methodically. During training exercises, she consistently performed at or near the top of the platoon. Her shooting was precise. Her dive skills were exceptional. Her physical fitness was unquestionable. But what truly set her apart was her ability to think clearly under pressure. During simulated combat scenarios, when the fog of war descended and the plan fell apart and everyone was scrambling to adapt, Jordan was the calm voice on the radio. She was the one who saw the angles that others missed. She was the one who made the call that saved the mission, or pulled the team out of a bad situation before it got worse. Her platoon chief, a master chief named Dominic Reeves, started assigning her more and more responsibility during exercises. He made her the point person on reconnaissance operations. He put her in charge of planning the water insertion phases of amphibious exercises. He gave her the lead on intelligence briefings. And every single time, she delivered. 6 months into her assignment, the platoon was deployed overseas to a region where American Special Operations Forces were conducting counter-terrorism operations. Jordan had trained for this moment her entire career, but nothing could fully prepare a person for the reality of being in a combat zone for the first time. The air was different, the sounds were different, the way people moved and talked and looked at each other was different. Everything carried weight. Every decision mattered. Every moment was saturated with the awareness that things could go wrong very quickly and very permanently. The first few weeks of the deployment were relatively quiet. The platoon conducted a series of low-risk reconnaissance missions and information-gathering operations. Jordan excelled in these roles. Her attention to detail and her ability to read terrain and assess threats made her one of the most valuable reconnaissance operators in the unit. She spent hours studying satellite imagery, cross-referencing intelligence reports, and building target packages that gave the platoon the clearest possible picture of the operational environment. The intelligence officer attached to the team, a lieutenant named Park, told Reeves privately that Jordan's analytical work was some of the best he had seen from a non-intelligence specialist. The mission that changed everything happened on a Thursday night 7 weeks into the deployment. The platoon received intelligence that a high-value target, a senior commander in a regional terror network, was located in a compound in a remote area. The compound was near a river, which meant the infiltration plan called for a water approach. The platoon would travel upriver in small boats under cover of darkness, disembark at a designated point, and patrol overland to the compound. Once there, they would conduct a precision raid to capture or eliminate the target. Jordan was assigned as the lead navigator for the water infiltration phase. She had studied the river system extensively and had identified a series of potential challenges, including shifting currents, debris fields, and areas where the river narrowed enough to create natural choke points that could be used for ambushes. She briefed the platoon thoroughly before the mission and answered every question with the kind of calm, detailed confidence that had become her signature. The insertion went smoothly. The boats moved upriver in near total darkness, guided by Jordan's navigation and night vision equipment. The team disembarked at the designated point and began the overland patrol toward the compound. The terrain was rough and uneven, with thick vegetation that made movement slow and difficult. Jordan was near the front of the patrol, moving carefully, scanning every shadow for signs of threat. The night was quiet, except for the distant sound of the river and the occasional call of a night bird. They reached the compound perimeter just before midnight. The assault plan called for 2 teams to breach from different entry points simultaneously, while a third team provided overwatch and cut off any escape routes. Jordan was assigned to the first breach team. As they stacked up on the door, she could hear her own breathing inside her helmet. Steady and controlled, the same breathing pattern she had learned in the surf at Coronado, the same pattern she had used at the bottom of the training pool when Braddock pushed her under. The breach was loud and fast. The door came off its hinges and the team poured into the building, clearing rooms with practiced efficiency. The first 2 rooms were empty. The third room had 3 individuals who were quickly secured. The fourth room, at the end of a narrow hallway, was where the target was believed to be. Jordan was the second person through the door. What happened next lasted approximately 9 seconds. But for Jordan, time stretched and distorted in the way it does during moments of extreme intensity. The room was dimly lit. There were 2 figures inside. One was reaching for something on a table. The other was moving toward a window. Jordan identified the first figure as an armed threat and engaged. Her training took over completely. Her weapon came up, her sight picture was clear, and she made the decision that every SEAL trains for but hopes never to face. She neutralized the threat with 2 precise shots. The second figure was unarmed and was immediately secured by her teammate. The room fell silent. Jordan stood there with her weapon still raised, her eyes scanning every corner, every surface, every shadow. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, but her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. She had just performed exactly as she had been trained to perform, and she had done it without hesitation, without panic, and without a single wasted movement. The target was confirmed. The mission was complete. The extraction was tense but orderly. The platoon moved back through the compound, secured their prisoners, and made their way to the extraction point where helicopters were waiting. Jordan was quiet during the ride back to base. She stared out the window of the helicopter at the dark landscape below and processed what had just happened. She did not feel pride. She did not feel excitement. She felt the weight of what she had done settle into her bones in a way that she knew would never fully leave. This was the cost of being a warrior. This was the price that was paid in the dark places of the world by the people who volunteered to go there. And Jordan had paid it without complaint, just as she had paid every other cost along the way. In the debrief that followed the mission, the platoon's performance was evaluated by senior officers from the task force command. The debrief was thorough and detailed, covering every phase of the operation from planning to execution to extraction. When the discussion turned to the water infiltration phase, the navigational precision and the smooth execution were highlighted as critical factors in the mission's success. Jordan's name came up repeatedly. When the discussion turned to the breach and the engagement in the target room, her actions were described as textbook. The task force commander, a captain named Morrison, asked Reeves who had been responsible for the navigational planning and the breach execution. Reeves said, "Petty Officer Carter, sir?" Morrison looked at Jordan, who was sitting quietly at the back of the room. He nodded once and said, "Outstanding work." After the debrief, Reeves pulled Jordan aside. He was not a man who gave compliments easily or frequently. He had been a SEAL for over 20 years and had seen hundreds of operators come and go. He looked at Jordan and said something she would never forget. He said, "Carter, I have been doing this for a long time. I have served with some of the best operators this community has ever produced, and I am telling you right now, you are going to lead a unit one day. Not because you are the strongest or the fastest, but because when things go sideways, when the plan falls apart and people are scared and nothing makes sense, you are the one who stays steady. You are the one who keeps everyone else from breaking. That is the rarest quality a leader can have, and you have more of it than anyone I have ever worked with." She thought about her father in his backyard, counting her push-ups. She thought about Coach Raines telling her that relentless beats talented. She thought about Marcus Delgado at the lunch table telling her she was crazy but believing in her anyway. She thought about the cold water and the long nights and the bell she never rang. She thought about the letter in her pocket and the man who wrote it and the 43 days she had with him after she earned her trident. She said, "Thank you, Master Chief." Over the following months and years, Jordan Carter did exactly what Reeves predicted. She rose through the ranks with a steady consistency that reflected the person she was. She completed multiple deployments. She led missions that saved lives and changed the outcomes of operations that mattered. She mentored younger operators, both men and women, and taught them what she had learned about endurance and leadership and the power of staying calm when the world is screaming. She was eventually selected for a leadership position within her SEAL team, making her one of the highest-ranking female operators in the history of naval special warfare. The selection process was grueling, involving evaluations from every commanding officer she had ever served under, interviews with senior leaders in the special operations community, and a review of her operational record that spanned years of service. When the results were announced, the reaction within the community was not surprise. It was recognition. The people who had served with her, who had watched her refuse to quit, who had seen her pull Peters out of the water during Hell Week, who had watched her lead a squad through a simulated combat mission with nothing but calm authority and clear thinking, who had been beside her in the breach when she made the hardest decision a warrior can make, all of them knew. They had known for a long time. On the day she assumed her new leadership role, Jordan stood in front of her unit for the first time as their commander. She looked at the faces in front of her, young and eager and nervous and ready. and she saw herself in every one of them. She saw the girl from Oklahoma who had been told she did not belong. She saw the candidate who had been pushed underwater and refused to panic. She saw the operator who had navigated a river in the dark and breached a door in the silence and done the hardest thing a person can do without losing herself in the process. She kept her remarks brief. She told them that she did not believe in speeches. She believed in actions. She told them that she would never ask them to do anything she had not done herself or would not do alongside them. She told them that the only thing she expected from them was their best effort on every single day, and in return, she would give them hers. And then she said one last thing. She said, "The water is going to hit you. It is going to hit you when you least expect it, and it is going to try to break you. It will be cold, and it will be dark, and it will make you want to quit. Do not quit. Stay calm. Stay together. And keep swimming. Because the other side is worth every stroke. Not the silence of indifference, the silence of respect, the silence of people who understood that the person standing in front of them had earned every word she had just spoken." Jordan returned to her quarters that evening and sat on the edge of her bunk. She pulled the old letter from her father out of the drawer where she kept it and read it one more time. The paper was worn and soft from years of handling. The handwriting was faded but still legible. She traced her finger over the words. "The warrior wearing it is everything." And she felt the tears come for the first time in a very long time. She let them fall. She had earned them. Outside her window, the sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean. The same ocean that had tried to break her during Hell Week. The same ocean she had crossed on deployment. The same ocean that had witnessed her transformation from a quiet girl with calloused hands and a dream that nobody believed in into one of the most respected leaders in the most elite fighting force on the planet. The water had hit the rookie. It had hit her harder than it had hit almost anyone else. And she had not just survived it. She had turned it into the very thing that made her unstoppable, because Jordan Carter understood something that most people spend their entire lives trying to learn. The water does not care who you are or where you came from or what people think of you. The water only cares about one thing, whether you keep swimming. And Jordan Carter never stopped.